Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk Podcast, the series where I speak to those that can help us to understand human decision-making and what we can do to influence it. Now, you'll all be familiar with the term hacking, and you might even have heard of the term life hacking to refer to tricks or shortcuts to increase personal productivity or efficiency. But if I say the word sense hacking, then you'd be forgiven for not knowing what I'm talking about. Fortunately, my guest on this episode knows all about sense hacking because he's just written a book on it. Professor Charles Spence has been on the show before, but if you haven't heard that episode, and I strongly recommend you listen to it, then all you need to know is that he's the head of the Crossmodal Research Laboratory at Oxford University. Charles is interested in how people perceive the world around them. In particular, how our brains manage to process the information from each of our different senses. So with that said, you've probably worked out that sense hacking is all about hacking your senses. In simple terms, if we influence what our senses perceive, we can change our perspective on the world. Differences in what we see, hear, smell, or touch can impact the decisions we make. What you're about to hear are some fascinating insights and simple practical tips about how we can all hack our senses to make us behave differently. And if you're in the business of influencing other people, maybe you'll get some tips about how you might go about using sense hacking to do that as well. Who knows? Maybe the future of ethics and compliance isn't in making people read long, dull policies or attend boring training courses. Perhaps there's some sense hacking to be done. Either way, what you're about to hear are some wonderful insights from a highly engaging guest. So please enjoy my discussion with Professor Charles Spence on sense hacking. Charles, welcome back to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you back. The last episode that you were in was a great hit with my listeners, and I'm thrilled that you've written a book and that you're kind enough to come and talk to us about it. So can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for the book, and then we'll come on and explore what it covers.
Mm-hmm. So the new book, just out this week, 14th of January, finally. It's called Sensehacking, and it is a book about using the senses in everyday life. And it kind of, the inspiration for it, given last time I think I was talking about gastrophysics and the science of sort of hacking your food, is the editor told me I wasn't allowed to talk about food anymore. Otherwise, I'd be kind of pigeonholed as a food researcher, so I could talk about anything but food. And for that, I came up with sense hacking, which really takes me back to almost 2 decades ago now, when I was working with ICI and Quest on a project around the secrets of the senses and sensism. So in that time, really doing a big kind of trawl of the literature to see how the senses affect us, and more importantly, how our senses can be used to enhance well-being, productivity, so on and so forth. And with the book just out, it was a chance really to sort of revisit those topics covered in 2 decades ago, see what's changed, what's new, how much more we've learnt, and what was completely wrong, which wasn't much in the end, in the intervening decades. So it's really positioned as a book for the average person, both to alert them to how their senses work, be it in the home, in the office, when you're trying to sleep, when you're shopping, when you're exercising and playing sport, or when you're in the hospital as well.
And the bit that I found absolutely incredible, and it's sort of blindingly obvious when you start to think about it, but wasn't when I started, was this is pervasive, and it really does impact every aspect of our lives, how we perceive the world. And so, you know, there's obvious examples where you've got advertisers and people trying to, but it was astonishing for me how many times it's just happening to us all the time. So this is a key component of who we are. Our senses, you know, as you reveal in the book, play a massive part in every aspect of our lives. And it's just something that we don't really recognize.
Right. That's certainly true. I think, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we're always in an environment with an atmosphere, a context that's stimulating several, if not all, of our senses. And one of the themes that comes out from the book is, you know, very often our environments are kind of tend to be pretty constant, and things that are constant we tend to adapt to and are no longer aware of. We pay attention to change, to new stuff, to moving stuff. The things that stay constant, like the smell of our own home, it's always there. We always know that everybody else's house has a smell, but we never smell our own home, except for that rare moment when you come back from a long trip away, you open the front door and go, it smells strange. And that is the smell of your home that everyone else gets, but you don't because you live there too and spend too much of your time there. And the key thing is that even though many of these sensory cues are kind of in the background, either unattended, we're not aware of them, they're kind of subliminal almost, nevertheless, they can still affect us, affect our mood, our well-being, our sleep quality, our productivity. And hence it makes sense to kind of try and pick up what are those sensory cues that surround us, what are they doing to us, and how can we hack them in order to enhance whatever outcome we are after.
One of the themes that came out from the book very clearly was our connection to nature. And sort of the outside world, and the fact that, firstly, that being indoors a lot isn't natural for us, and therefore that has an impact. But I was really struck around what I will sort of simply call the evolutionary aspect of it. In other words, that we really have a connectivity with the planet that drives a lot of the way we look at the world.
That's right. And this is one of these sort of themes broadly called the nature effect these days. That was just sort of beginning back in 20 years ago when I started thinking about sensism and sense hacking. But has really come on in leaps and bounds over the last decade or so. Probably inspired in the first instance back in the 80s by research saying that those few patients in a North American hospital who had a room with a view of nature seemed to recover better than those who had a view of a brick wall outside their window. That nature was somehow good for us, maybe because sort of these natural environments with greenery are the sorts of environments in which we've evolved and we've found to be sort of drawn towards those healthy, safe environments, in the sense that, greenery and foliage might provide a shelter and cover and somewhere to hide when a saber-toothed tiger comes along. And at the same time, also that kind of the blues of, be it the sort of blue of water, of the sea, of lakes, of rivers, is also kind of appealing because of what it might provide in terms of sustenance. So this comes as the nature effect. And for me, while much of the literature around the nature effect has been based on kind of what it looks like, the greens and the blues, the colours of nature, the fact that, so many of when we used to have calendars, so many of those would have, kind of nature scenes and blue and greens on them. Why was that? But for me, as a multisensory scientist, I think, nature comes to all of our senses. There's also the sounds of nature, the smells of nature, maybe even the feel of nature too. And they all individually affect us. And more importantly for me and for the book, kind of is how they come together. When do they synergize to give a bigger nature effect? And when sometimes do they kind of go against one another and they kind of cancel each other out? And my sort of example is, while writing the book, my mother was in a care home just outside Oxford, and I used to go cycling up to see her along sort of the outskirts of Oxford. It's a quite beautiful countryside, but by a main road with all the traffic noise. So the kind of obvious question is, well, okay, I'm in nature, so is it good for me? Or is that all that traffic noise and fumes, are they kind of cancelling out all the benefit I'm getting? Or, for those of us who spend so much time with headphones on and our personal music, again, is that music cancelling out the benefits of being in around nature? So the evidence shows, that nature is good, that the more senses are stimulated, the better. And then maybe, I've had a long interest in ambient scents and fragrances and aromas and the smells of flowers and scented candles. And why is aromatherapy so good for us? Why are these smells of plants and herbs so good? Well, maybe that's kind of the smelly nature effect. These are the smells. And so we can put it all together to deliver more healing environments. I'm just at present speaking to you from the farm I have with my wife just outside Bogota, Colombia, surrounded by nature and the birds. We've got hummingbirds and red, blue, yellow, grey, purple birds, surrounded by nature, flora and fauna. And in this case, you can sort of feel the benefits both for oneself. One sleeps better, one thinks differently, one writes differently, it's really powerful. But any one of us at home, maybe stuck in an inner city, can also get some aspect of the nature effect by going for a walk at lunchtime, say, or even what's interesting to me is, can we kind of simulate nature or have like a mediated sensorium where, staring at one of those screensavers we all have on our computers with pretty pictures of scenery. Does that give me a nature effect? I'm not in nature, but I can sort of see a nature scene, and the answer is yes, it does. And then one might ask, do plastic plants, are they as good for us, or those of us who struggle to sleep, and some of us listen to these kind of nature soundscapes? You can get like 8 hours of babbling brooks or bird song or forest, and that's clearly you're not in nature, but it's a mediated version, a digital representation of nature, and yet it still helps. And that is sort of exciting to think, well, we can deliver the benefits, enhance them by combining the senses, and then maybe actually kind of supercharge them in some way by saying, what is it about nature? What is it about the green that's so good? And how exactly does it link to our evolutionary past? And there I kind of give the example that was sort of most striking to me from research in North America around people's sort of thermostat settings. From Alaska to Florida, from hot to very cold, and yet wherever you go in the States, people have their thermostats set to about 23 degrees and more or less the same humidity level. That, if you look around the world, all geographical weather, climatic data matches most closely the Ethiopian highlands where we're thought to evolve, have done much of our evolution. So it's almost as if, we're sort of hardwired for these evolutionary old weather patterns, and hence if we can adapt our homes and our lives to some of those patterns or themes, we're likely to be better off than we are in the built environment, where I think so often we spend, us urbanites, which is most of the world's population now, spend 95% of their lives indoors. And that's a very different kind of sensory stimulation from the natural outdoor environments and the changes that we would have been exposed to previously. And my real worry is, what is that doing to us in terms of sick building syndrome, light hunger for us in the northern Europe and North America in the winter months, and increasingly currently sort of touch hunger with all of these people who are sort of isolated, locked away in care homes, who can't touch, and they say, I just want one thing before I die, to be able to hug my family, my children, my dog, whatever it is.
It was fascinating for me, I think, to think about it in normal times. But as you say, given what we're going through at the moment and the asks of us, just the simple instruction to stay indoors, don't stay at home, has implications, these pieces. The inability to travel and experience new things. As you say, the majority of people stuck in cities, in environments, they're working, they're not even getting a commute to go to an office or a workplace in many cases. And so a lot of these stimuli, that sort of we are potentially, many people are deprived of under normal circumstances, as you say, are being really pulled away. And I found it very fascinating to think sort of in many respects, we're deprived under normal circumstances, many of us. We're particularly deprived now.
That's right. So I sort of think of it in terms of kind of a sort of a sensory imbalance that follows on from our indoor existence and may be exacerbated by the kind of COVID lockdowns that we've been through. Many people will say, I just get too information. So like sensory overload. That's what I hate. There's too much information, too much noise, too many messages, too many alerts, too many emails. But when you sort of break that down, it seems like it's mostly too much audio-visual information mediated by technology. There are very few people out there who are saying, I've just got too much touch going on, or there are so many smells. And so it's like an imbalance. We're overstimulating the rational, the higher logical senses that we can deliver through technology. And at the same time, I think we're neglecting, Tiffany Field in the States has a great term for this, called touch hunger. That and again, the emerging neuroscience increasingly says, and this has changed a lot over the last 2 decades, we need to stimulate our biggest sense, our sense of touch. You can look at it across different species. It has all sorts of benefits. You can see how people sort of self-medicate almost by, back in the day, buying stuff from the sharper image stores, where a quarter of the items in this North American kind of gadget store were massaging spiders and vibrating Easy Boy chairs and the like, through sort of spa treatments again. And so I think the COVID lockdown has really exacerbated that touch hunger. And again, you see so many reports, or at least I do when I see the press of these elderly people behind glass who can see their relatives, they can talk to them, but that's not enough. What they're missing is the stimulation of those more emotional senses, the touch, and I think also probably the smell of our nearest and dearest too. And so this is sort of imbalance, both not getting enough touch, but also I think in the home environment, there's a kind of a monotony. I mean, given that we were already spending 95%, I mean, I can't really believe it, but all statistics from 2 decades now and surveys across various countries say urbanites spend 95% of the time indoors. That probably can't get much higher during COVID. But what does change is it's monotonous. It's just your own home, and we kind of code our emotions relative to the spaces we're in, the smells that we have. And hence, if I've just had a busy, stressful Zoom meeting with my work colleagues or whatever in the living room, and then I'm trying to sleep in the same kind of environment, it can be harder to separate out things. And it can be increasingly important. One of the things sense hacks I recommend is if you find yourself in that space at home after the stressful meeting, one of the simplest things to do to kind of reset your mood is to change the smell. Doesn't matter what the smell was before, our brains will kind of associate the stress and the tension with that smell, just in the same way that, eugenol that we get in the dentists, that kind of smell of cloves makes lots of people very stressful, their heartbeat go up, they start sweating, not because it's a stressful smell per se, but just because it's associated with a stressful environment. And that happens to all of us with the smell of our homes or our offices when we've had a meeting that's not gone the right way, say, or our paper's been rejected or our grant's been rejected or whatever it is with people like me. And simply by putting a new smell in the space can suddenly help to reset and make it easier to move on. And, for those, many of us who report difficulties of sleeping, which seems to be, again, sort of the majority of the population for at least some of the time, then, sense hacking through scent, through maybe releasing lavender at night, can help to improve the sleep of everyone from newborn babies to their parents, to your parents. And in some cases, these sense hacks can be more effective than the medicinal, the pharmacological treatments, the sleeping pills that do knock you out for a few hours, but which don't give you the right kinds of sleep. Whereas maybe, drifting off with lavender or some other pleasant scent not only makes you sleep longer, but you get the right kind of sleep you need to recover as well.
I was struck very much around, one of these things where you read the book and then suddenly I was paying much more attention to what was going on, and very small things seem to have a big impact. And you talked about toothpaste, for example, which is sort of the majority of people. Now, I happen to use licorice toothpaste. Now, it is licorice with a hint of mint. And I found a company that makes very unusual toothpaste. So they've got a cinnamon one and a licorice. Mm-hmm. And I was sort of, got to try this, clearly. And it's been revolutionary. I actually use different flavors of the morning and night because something you cover in the book, which is sort of, do we want mint waking us up just as we're about to go to bed? And it's such a small point, but once you start to think about those things, it becomes really obvious. And I was really struck by how significant very small things are like that.
Mm-hmm. So it can be both small things and kind of unnoticed things. I think it's sort of a lot of the book is about how kind of one sense can affect another one, how the scent or the sound can affect the brightness of the lighting. And hence, it's these kind of unnoticed sensory cues that do change our experience, change our perception, without our necessarily being able to pin down quite what the cause was. And for me, this is, in a way, sort of emerges naturally from the gastrophysics book, which was, you can take food and say all the factors and the sensory elements that affect your perception of food, and you could just put ourselves in the place of the dish, then all the same multisensory interactions take place. They're just a bit harder to study, perhaps, with people than they are with food, but they all apply. And by drawing attention to them and sort of understanding some of these principles, that just because you're not aware of an environmental sensory cue like the temperature or the smell or background noise doesn't mean they don't have a profound impact in and of themselves, but more importantly, as they multiply with the other senses. And that too often, I guess, we are not only visually dominant creatures, so we tend to think an experience primarily in terms of what we see, and hence we don't really have much of a consciousness or awareness of the other senses that may be affecting us, especially emotionally more. And nor are we necessarily very good at kind of forecasting. I mean, I think probably the average person would say, yeah, going out into nature, yeah, I sort of get it. It's got to be good for you. I kind of knew that sort of. But none of us know how much better it turns out to be. And this is what comes out from survey after surveys and sort of big data analyses and prompting people on their mobile devices, hundreds of thousands of them in their daily lives, and finding, when they are out in nature, especially if they're by the seaside, then suddenly their ratings of well-being go way up and so much higher than we predict they would. And hence that's why more of us don't actually do what would be good for us, because we don't realize how much better we would feel as a result.
And one of the things I found really interesting was when you were talking about, and I'll use sort of simplified terminology, but the sort of things that seemed incongruous. So there are, if our senses give us conflicting positions, we hear a sound that doesn't belong, that causes us, I won't quite say anxiety, but it seemed to cause confusion. And I was really intrigued by that idea because it's sort of obvious, and yet some of the ways you talked about it, it seems to have quite a severe impact on us if things don't seem right.
That's right. So I guess the marketeers, some of the psychologists will sort of talk about flow or processing fluency, things that we just find easier to process, being liked more, reducing or giving rise to less stress, and sort of congruency between the senses can be sort of thought in that context, that things that go together, that we expect to belong, that do belong together, are easy to process. Whereas when the senses give us incongruent messages, they conflict, and hence, I see this a lot in my work in retail over the years, as people have tried to introduce sound or scent or change the lighting in their stores. There's plenty of literature just showing that each one of those things individually does what it says on the pack. It will increase sales, footfall, walking speed, and so on. But when you start combining them without thinking about how they relate, suddenly you get into all sorts of problems. And this may explain why in some, say, North American MAL studies, where they have, add some music in the MAL and sales go up by $30 a person. This in North America. Add scent, nothing much happens. Add scent and music, and sales drop compared to what they were before you started messing around. Why is that? Shouldn't more senses be better? Well, it might be sensory overload if you do too much, or it might be just an incongruency. If I've got upbeat music, but I've got a relaxing fragrance, then they're kind of incongruent, and hence the brain doesn't know how to process that. It lacks processing fluency, and maybe those different effects cancel out, and I sort of see that again and again. But also it's one of those things that sort of I'm still pursuing now, even though the book's just come out. I've got a whole folder of stuff on, what is congruency exactly? Because if I read the chapter on, say, on the garden, and I see about the benefits of the nature effect, and I see that if I play forest sounds like we have here in Glasgow Airport, as was done a few years ago, or in Hamley's Toy Store, or in Audi, I think in London, had one of their storerooms with sort of nature sounds. That triggers the nature effect, but it's kind of incongruent with the space. I don't expect tropical nature sounds in Scotland. So how does the brain respond? Does it matter whether you think those nature sounds are real or not? Does it matter? Yeah, congruency is an intriguing notion that I'm still sort of working on. Because many things, when you think about them, are sort of incongruent, like going to a restaurant and there's music playing in the background. Well, there's no band anywhere. It's and the track changes, but your food doesn't. So maybe, do you want congruent Indian food with Indian music? Does that always matter? So yeah, it's I think a key theme, and one that is often neglected by those who just try and hack their senses, but do it one sense at a time, because there are always multiple senses at work, and the relation between those sensory inputs is always important, I think, and in the best cases can be summed possibly in a super additive way to give you a bigger benefit than you'd get just from tweaking the smell or the sounds or the visuals, that potentially do far more.
And you've referenced technology and the sort of the dynamics that are easier to deliver through technology and things that are harder. But one of the things I was really struck by was you're talking a lot about autonomous cars, the challenges there. And for example, it hadn't really occurred to me, but this idea that a human being needs to be ready to step in certain situations because we can't let the car do that. How do you do that if you're fast asleep or you're doing something? And so thinking around the interaction between human and machine, a lot of this stuff comes into play in ways I hadn't really thought about.
And for me, I kind of sort of started my research career really working in Germany with the sort of European Space Agency and BMW on interface design. And in the intervening years before I got into food, I was doing a lot of stuff on warning signals. So cars have always been kind of central to my applied research interests. And I sort of moved away from the design of warning signals a few years ago, how to beep and flash and vibrate people, just because of the rise of sort of autonomous vehicles, meaning that the future looked quite different from the past in terms of multisensory interactions in that case. And yet I think cars are really interesting and transport's really interesting because maybe it's one of the most highly engineered and researched areas. So, we did a lot of work on packaging sounds, on machine sounds, and how to enhance them to improve product perception. But if you want to know what's been done before, how to do it best, look at the sound of car doors or the work that goes into the psychoacoustics works that goes into the sound of the car engine. Is there any more powerful smell, I think, than the new car smell? New car smell isn't. You weren't born like a new car smell, and yet it is one of the most powerful triggers, even for those who, I give the example, who have a Rolls-Royce car. This is going back a decade or two, but they used to send their car to the Midlands, have it serviced every few years and polished, and it would come back and people would say, wow, it's just like new. What have you done to it? Here you've got a £250,000 purchase, and simply by adding, they spray the smell of a 1955, silver cloud, leather and wood finish into the car before they give it back to the customer. And that simple sense hack, nothing more than a scent, can profoundly change your relationship with that. One of probably the most expensive purchase people will likely ever make. And again, so there's a whole teams of experts working on the smell of new car smell. What is it? The whole teams of people working on the sound of the car door, how the engine should sound to the drivers of the high-end marques. And all of those kind of insights and developments have been, I think, furthered most in the car world, then can be transposed to aerosol cans, packets of crisps, coffee machines, fridge doors, you name it. And so when it comes to kind of the rise of autonomous vehicles, probably there too, the research may be more advanced, both in terms of dealing with the sort of problems of even electric cars and if they make no noise. Is that a good thing? Well, no, it's not, because people don't know they're there and have lots more accidents. So what should silent vehicles sound like? You need to give them a sound. And what are you trying to convey by so doing? Through to this is a real sort of question of these vehicles where the car starts to take more control, and yet the driver has to be ready to take back control in case something goes wrong. And that's a really sort of difficult psychological state to be in, I think. Doing nothing for a long car journey, that's really boring. But if so, there are obviously various patents and stuff about having the driver so they can turn the window screen into a movie screen or play video games or blog or whatever it might be. But then if you're in a sort of digital world, how then can you suddenly switch people back to the real world? So how can you maintain concentration without getting people too hooked and whatever else they might be doing, nor falling asleep? A real challenge, and almost then becomes this sort of problem of you've got people who you need to be able to flip immediately from the digital world, the virtual world, to the real world, and probably nowhere else does every millisecond matter quite as much as for driving. And that was my older work on warning signals, how to get people to hit the brakes or the steering wheel quicker, a challenge, but part of that sort of story about that, the autonomous vehicles, is also wrapped up in the idea of some of the German car companies who a few years ago had this idea they wanted to sense hack the interior of the car for the driver. It's all about the experience. That's how you can differentiate these days. And their goal at one meeting was to have drivers that come home from work at the end of the day, they drive into the driveway, and they just sit there in the car. Because the environment has been engineered to be so multisensorily pleasurable, the seat's so soft, the fragrance so nice, the music so soothing, that they just stay there. And if you can do that, if you can get drivers to want to be in that highly engineered multisensory environment and not going to their home, then you've probably got a winner on your hands. And whatever they were trying to do in that scenario, if you extend it then to the home or to wherever else we other places we inhabit, I think there are probably insights to be had.
And that, quite amusing, actually, because the number of Zoom calls I've done with people where they've turned their car into, particularly where they've been homeschooling kids, there aren't enough rooms in the house. So they actually just said, well, the car's the perfect office because I can get my broadband. I've got, and it's silly little things. There's a coffee cup holder here. I've got a nice little thing for my mobile phone so I can do my Zoom calls in the car. So it actually doesn't seem that far-fetched. And you're absolutely right. Once you start thinking about it in those contexts, it's designed for you to sit there. It's super comfortable.
And the whole car sort of thing again is, you mentioned earlier about these, the very subtle influences that affect us. And there's sort of work about how the colour of the car affects how fast you think it's going, how much noise it seems to be making, and all of these sort of visual sensory cues are combining and influencing our judgments in ways that can be hopefully optimised for better experiences, both for the drivers, but also for sort of pedestrians and others out there.
The context of cars is interesting because you talk in terms of safety and optimizing things. Now, there is clearly, and the whole of your book is a very positive view of the world, of all the good things that we could do for ourselves. And clearly, there's a dark side to this. And I'm really intrigued by the sort of the ethics around it, because I think unlike, we can see when an advert is misleading us because the words are there and we can sort of say, that's so.
I mean, for me, very often when we used to have real physical talks pre-COVID, then I talk about sort of sensory marketing and neuromarketing and even some of the food design work and gastrophysics. The question would come up, is this ethical or is this scary? And for me, I have to say that's kind of a compliment in the first instance. Why so? Because it implies people sort of believe this is real, believe this is important, which contrasts with the way things were 10 or 20 years ago when I was going around talking about the colour of plates changing the taste of food, and companies and hospitals would just say, don't be ridiculous, go away, no way that could be true. And as soon as you get people to switch to say, isn't that scary, or what about the ethics of this, maybe versions of the same question, then that's sort of success that people are now saying, okay, no, I sort of get it. I'm convinced that this could be real, and hence, what are the implications? And the book itself is sort of framed mostly around the activities of daily life and what we can do for ourselves. There's one chapter on shopping, which is a bit more about what they're doing to us. And probably in the next book, tentatively called Business Sense, I'll go deep into the dark side of things. But I think some of the insights around sensory interaction, they have many of them have been intuited by marketeers and designers over the decades. I think cognitive neuroscience that's emerged over the last decade or two has sort of helped to understand why some of these subtle factors might influence us in quite the way they do, and extend them from one situation to another. But that knowledge about the power of the senses, even if developed in the context of industry-funded research, I think is just knowledge. And any one of us can take that knowledge and then use it to say, well, how are they influencing us? When I go to a McDonald's or to my local pub and I hear they're playing this kind of music, or a restaurant, on the other hand, how can I take that knowledge in myself, for my own environment, how can I get my family to be happier at the dinner table? How can I stop myself eating so much in the home? How can I sleep better? And all the same insights can be applied there. And when we're in control, then I think that negates some of the concerns. But clearly there is a potential danger, or one might say an opportunity that a lot of the work we've done around retail, multisensory environments for retail, a bit of which is touched upon in the shopping chapter. We might frame it as, if you can make the experience as pleasurable as possible, then shoppers will want to linger for longer. And if they linger for longer because they're enjoying the experience, then they may end up purchasing more. So you're not really directly accessing their wallets, but doing it through something that they potentially enjoy. For me, it's some of the examples I sort of start off the book with examples just like why is it that all analog watches say the time's 10 past 10? Absolutely no reason for that. It wasn't always the case. It was some designer or marketeer in the 1920s who kind of clicked that if analog watch shows 10 past 10, it looks like it's smiling at you, whereas 20 past 8 looks like it's frowning and sad. And recent research shows that really does change your effective evaluations. And that's there all the time. But you just never realize it until somebody points it out. And then you start looking through all the magazines and you say, hey, yeah, why didn't I realize before that every watch is at 10 past 10 or 9 minutes past 10? Or through to my other sort of favorite examples of the circle on the 7-Up can or the star on the San Pellegrino bottle. These kind of symbols that are communicating almost directly with our brains and that we're not really aware of, that we never think about. So when you said, adverts were kind of aware of what's going on, I wonder whether that's really the case. Maybe the words that they say we can quiz and check, but the images and the symbols are kind of communicating in an almost subliminal way. And it's only when you stop and say, well, what is that star doing on the front of the 7-Up bottle? Why are there 7 stars on many 7-Up? San Pellegrino bottles? Why is the red circle on the front of the 7-Up logo on the can? Again, in the latter case, it was an intuitive marketeer, Louis Cheskin, I think in the 50s and 60s in the States, who came up with that as a good thing of round and red being sweet. And for the San Pellegrino, it may just be it's been there since the brand was started in the 1890s. It's not there on the Aqua Panna, the kind of still water brand, but I think it's because the star is almost synesthetically linked to carbonation and hence that's what you get in a sparkling water, and hence why so many beer brands also have this kind of angular labels. But again, no one says what it's the Heineken star's doing there on the front of the can, the bottle. No one says what the Estrella or the Mahou, the Red Stripe, the Newcastle Brown Ale all have angular, very often red shapes on the front. And it's this whole level of kind of subconscious communication that can be used not really against us, but to influence us or to talk to us without language, but then which we can almost translate into the home environment when thinking about the design of spaces, of furniture, and angularity and roundness, and of colours of the home, of the kitchen, or the living room, or the bedroom, and how they affect us in this almost subliminal way.
And do you think we're intuitively good at this stuff? Because one of the things that struck me as I read it, it was again, the book's full of little tips and ideas that are very easily actionable. And I really liked that bit. That I came away with the stuff I could try myself.
Well, the red underpants.
It's the sort of antithesis of the don't try at home. It's precisely the do it. But it sort of it struck me on the one when I'd read it and you pointed it out to me, I was like, oh, that sort of makes sense. On the other hand, I kind of why has that never occurred to me before? And I suddenly started to look at other things that maybe are influencing me that I hadn't even considered. Are we intuitively good at this stuff?
So I think we are all visually dominant creatures, and as such, because more of our brain is given over to what we see, we really do miss the importance of, and very often the stimulation of our more emotional senses, the smell and the touch and the taste. So almost we're hardwired not to be able to talk about smells, not to really be able to think about them, and hence not to realise their importance. At the same time, I think the way it appears to us is I see stuff, I hear things, I feel things, and those senses are very clearly different. And yet all the neuroscience research sort of shows that no, if I change what you're hearing, I can change what you're seeing. If I change what you're seeing, I can change what you're feeling. If I change what you smell, it'll change what you taste. So the senses are doing lots of crosstalk before they give us access consciously to what's going on. So what I think I'm seeing is really the result of what's going in my eyes, but also what's going in my ears, and maybe what I'm feeling too. And it's for that reason that these kind of multisensory interactions very often happen before awareness. Makes it difficult for any of us really to intuitively realize what's actually going on, in the way that, for example, that so many people, and this is sort of relevant currently with the COVID and kind of the loss of sense of smell that many individuals are reporting, that they're, when the rest of us, when we have a head cold or something, we say, no, I can't taste, food's lost its taste. And yet when you test people, the taste buds are working fine. What you've lost is the sense of smell because your nose is all blocked. And yet we don't realize that it's a smell because our brain tells us we're smelling in our mouth. So our brain, again, is integrating smell and taste, giving us only conscious access to the results, and hence we're unable to pull it apart and say, that's what came from my eyes, that's what came from my ears. And it's that automatic, probably it's not always automatic integration, but very often it is. And it's the fact that it's automatic and it happens pre-consciously means we can't introspect about it, and hence maybe we're not aware of the influences. And when that's combined with visual dominance, I always imagine it's my eyes what did it. So I don't realize that. For me, this kind of links back to the technology question of, there are many people who have been trying to digitally stimulate smell. So doing more of our shopping online. Many food companies would love to be able to, pipe in the smell of baking bread through your PC or mobile device in order to make you, buy more or buy different. But that's really hasn't sort of worked yet technologically. But I think even psychologically, it will not come to pass because even in those cases where people have introduced a digital scent, say, there's one company who launched a smell of fresh cut grass for the last World Cup, or the one before. That you could plug into your TV and it would give the smell of grass, be like a multisensory, and maybe the football game would be better. And in fact, you could demonstrate that, yes, that the football game was was more enjoyable. People said as a result of adding the smell that was congruent with what you saw. And yet, when you ask people at the end of the game, why was that game so good? They will always attribute it to what they saw and to the action, and nobody will really realize that it's the smell. And hence, that's why my sort of fundamental problem with a digitized smelling and tasting is that no one's going to pay for the refill because no one appreciates the benefit because we're also visually dominant. And that's why when car companies, even like I think Peugeot, were offering scent capsules to scent your car, and they sort of gave the customers, for one model, like a 6-month supply of the refills to scent your car like this, like that, or like something else. But I really think after the 6 months, they're going to struggle to get the car owners to pay for the refill. And it's that, visual thinking that we all fall prey to that is so fundamentally important when thinking about what sort of sense hacks people will pay for. I mean, that they work is one thing, but that we realize why we feel the way we do is another kind of thing instead. And there are those who are, so most of us I think are very bad, but I am curious at the same time about kind of some of the designers and early marketeers and how they maybe have a more intuitive understanding of some of these signals, some of these connections. And very often what they did was, they didn't say how they came to a suggestion for a solution, but this is what your brand should look like or sound like, or and yet in hindsight, you think they must have been onto some of this stuff. And then maybe some of the best designers are, almost synesthetic. They have a much better sense of the connection between their senses than the rest of us do, and hence can use that to design things that the rest of us need to study to understand, I suppose.
In the book, you talk a lot about sort of personal experiences you've got, and you tell some sort of stories about how it's impacted you. And I'm intrigued to sort of explore that a little bit further and say, how is this impacting your daily life? Are you constantly on the lookout for these things? Is that sort of does that feel like it's a little bit of a busman's holiday in that you want to get away from thinking about these sorts of things? But how has it changed your life?
So I think I can give the example of I used to be a very, very naughty schoolboy indeed back in the day, and I was being spanked and thrashed and beaten before it was made illegal up in Leeds in the 1970s and early 80s. And heading down a bad track, I think. And then just through some teacher at school got interested in orienteering, which is kind of running in nature to find little triangles and get a stamp on your card. But essentially, it's a very deep immersion in the nature effect. And suddenly, around that time when I got my last public thrashing in front of all the schoolboys and all the headmasters and all the teachers. Suddenly, my performance started to pick up. And it's only in hindsight now I can say, look back, well, wow, what changed me from being was it the public thrashing? It's probably partly that, but it was also the nature effect of getting out suddenly into nature, several times a week, into the forests, running around, being surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells. Maybe that's what really helped my well-being, my performance, mood and behaviour and so on. And certainly the evidence would suggest that today. So that's looking back in the past. I think, wow, how have these things affected me then? Here today, so I'm lucky to be on sabbatical, which I almost got timed right to be in Colombia, while all my friends and family being locked down in the cold winters evenings in the UK. And I sort of realised for this last year or two that when I come here, I write differently. I think differently than I do when I'm at home in Oxford with all my files and stuff. And now I really think that is sort of the nature effect at work. So I'm sort of surrounded by 11 hectares of greenery and animals. So every day now I make sure to go out in the garden for a couple of hours, digging and chopping and killing nature, I suppose, but it grows back. And I probably get the benefit from it. The benefits of, we have a little herb garden here. We have lots of confused citrus trees, and the benefits, that's almost like touching nature. That clearly comes out, and I sort of spend more time doing that. I have the whole section in the book about the benefits of a hot bath, and I have that every day here, with the fragrance, of course, preceded by the very cold swimming pool. So that's also in the book, playing to our sort of tactile sense. So things that one can do. And for me, probably the biggest change that has happened since writing the book was that, or in writing the book, was that I used to be one of those people who could get by on 4 or 5 hours sleep a night, like Margaret Thatcher, like Ronald Reagan, like all the successful business people, and it's also sort of hard and to not need sleep. And then on writing the chapter about sleep and how to sense hack sleep, I came across a book from sort of Matthew Walker about why we sleep, a Liverpudlian, now Californian sleep scientist, and he was saying, we're one of the biggest. You're not alone in not sleeping much. Majority of the population suffer from lack of sleep, but it's one of the worst things you can do. Probably 13 out of the 15 leading causes of death are attributable or are made worse by shortage of sleep. And just reading all the research about how important sleep was really made me now switch to trying to use the sense hacks to get more sleep. And sort of successfully so far, because I'm doing about 9 hours a day. Maybe it's all those hours in the garden, wow. But really consciously trying to do better. And maybe it's partly that I used to be going to conferences every week around the world, so there'd be jet lag, and I always sort of suffer from what I came to realise was called the first night effect. The fact that no matter how jet lagged, how tired you are after a long haul flight, you get to a hotel, and no matter how soft and cosy the sheets are, you just can't sleep. And this is the name, it's the first night effect, we all have it. And again, what are the ways that one can try and sense hack that? By taking the scent of home with you to your new location, if you're lucky enough to stay in the same hotel room, to plug your ears up and so on and so forth. But I think that's the sleep is the one that I've realised most is so important, and it can be sense hacked, and probably spend a third of our lives, or should be, sleeping. But there's a lot of sensory stuff going on there that can help, and that can do so in ways that are less detrimental or better for us than the sleeping pills that I used to take years ago, or other solutions.
And it occurs to me as you were talking and I'd always thought of this in terms of buildings and, taking away natural light. But actually, in many of you referenced Margaret Thatcher and that sort of pride that she had in having virtually no 4 hours or whatever sleep. Yeah. It sort of occurs to me that actually many of the things that we seem to value, working ridiculously long hours and sort of, I haven't got no time for sleep, no time for holidays. A lot of these things that sort of particularly some of the more sort of aggressive industries and the sort of machismo culture are precisely the opposite of the sorts of things that we ought to be doing. It's very unnatural. And we seem to have built not just a physical as a sort of construct around that, but almost the way that many of us run our lives and we're forced to run our lives goes against precisely the things that we ought to be doing.
That is right, I think. And certainly in the chapter, I have a chapter on sort of work and there are those parts of the world, primarily Japan, where they have a special word for those people who die at the office from overwork, where they have to, I think, legally, make it illegal to work more than 120 hours overtime a week or something ridiculous like that. And in the UK, I think we're amongst have the highest number of hours of work per week amongst our European counterparts. And clearly there are many and work environments that are badly designed, that go against what we should be doing. And I sort of know this myself, that there's always this desire to maximize productivity, to minimize costs. So that's sort of led to, sort of desk sharing, and open offices have been such a dominant feature of the, and sort of, having no sort of blank tables and no greenery and anonymous spaces. And yet, clearly the research suggests that while the managers and the accountants might like that in terms of minimizing costs for the space, productivity goes down because you can't hear, or you get too much distraction from other people in an open plan office, say. And if you do the sums, in fact, you'd be better off going back to the way things were before for those who had the luxury of independent offices. And some of those more smarter firms out there, I guess, are recognizing the importance of the workplace and of trying to design the experience to maximize well-being, to sense hack in order to improve well-being of their staff, and hence with a long-term view that will improve productivity and so on. And I give the example kind of Amazon headquarters in Seattle, sort of biosphere. I was like, it has 40,000 plants in their head office, 400 species, something like that, and it looks like three kind of dome-shaped greenhouses.
It looked like you're working in Kew Gardens, from what I could see. It's amazing.
Yeah. And so why it's having plants in there? Seems going to water them. What's that going to do for productivity? Well, in fact, if you believe and you buy into the nature effect, then that's exactly what you should be doing. And I'm sort of very conscious of this currently because in Oxford, our 60s building was recently condemned 2 years ago now because of asbestos. And we've already moved out, and plans are afoot to design a new building for us. But, there's a lot of talk about, open plan offices. And you go, no, that's just not the way to go. So I think there is some of the more forward-thinking firms are taking notice both of the nature effect and designing environments with more greenery in them. Some studies are measuring the impact of, how much more productive people in call centers are with greenery, through to, I like to give the example of the use of food in a lot of those Silicon Valley companies. Why does the Googles and the others sort of give free food to their staff? And that sort of idea of using food and meal times and coffee stations sort of placed so as to maximize interaction between people in different parts of the building, especially in the sort of more creative industries, I guess, clearly does have a beneficial impact too. So you see in those forward-thinking companies, at least, some attempts to sense hack both the visual environment, the others who are using different kinds of sounds in the space, the sounds of nature, the sounds of waterfalls to mask other noises, using scent and food to more effectively get their staff more happy, more productive, and avoid what is that kind of sick building syndrome that was such a feature of the 70s and 80s of these office buildings where there's sort of no natural ventilation, where in the northern climes, in the winter months, it's something like 2 million people a year are estimated to be suffering from light hunger, stuck indoors without natural light. And you want to say, what responsibility do architects have, not just the companies, for designing these spaces that seem so ill-equipped for us, that offer such kind of monotonous, consistent environments that don't mirror the sort of natural rhythms that maybe we evolved for or to deal with.
And I loved in the book you sort of depicted, and it's sort of slightly tongue in cheek, but I recognise the dynamic, the sort of idea of let's get together to brainstorm some idea, and then what you do is you put people in this hideous environment, either conference suite in a hotel or some dingy basement room. And I think anybody that's worked for a largish company or organisation will recognise this dynamic. And as you were telling, I was just thinking, I've done a ton of those, and it's totally obvious. It's sort of, why do you expect people to be at their best when you put them in an environment that's not doing that? But yet that's as you say, it's a sort of prevalent thing.
And it just goes on and on and again and again, and it's almost as if we don't come back to an earlier point. We sort of don't realise just how much of an impact the senses have on us and the environments have on us, either because we're not aware of the sensory cues themselves, or because even if we are aware, of what the lighting level is like and the plastic plants in that dingy underground conference suite in a hotel, nevertheless, we think that won't affect us because it sort of feels like we're in charge and sort of exogenously we're in charge of what we think and how we think, and it's hard to believe that something as simple as the color of the lighting, the level of the background noise, or the scent would impact us. And yet the research on it does show that it does, and hence it's partly about making people aware, I suppose, of the emerging research and explaining why the environments might have such an impact that will then hopefully lead people to say, well, yeah, I kind of knew that couldn't have been right to be stuck in that basement for 3 days solid, eating sugary snacks without any natural light. And then hence hopefully we'll do something about it moving forward. In a way, again, that maybe some of those, having been a psychology student myself, then various of my colleagues have gone into the world of advertising, and when I get to sort of see them in sunny California now and again, then I used to be amazed at their sort of offices and their, I forget which company it was, but in the sort of the binoculars that are in Venice Beach, whichever company was there. One of my friends was working there, and they had space for thinking when you got stuck with. I just remember these sort of white sheets billowing in the breeze and soft, all-encompassing cushions. It's got touch. It's got along with all the food and the drinks and the games, and so different from even what you find in universities, especially different from what you find in hotel conference facilities. And yet these people, I guess, intuitively knew that worked, but that sort of insight hadn't really transferred to the rest. But I suspect, they currently in discussion with some of the hotel folk, and I think it's sort of, obviously they're suffering with Airbnb and the like, and so maybe their minds have been focused a bit more on how to actually deliver the right kind of facilities and functionality, and and to actually create spaces that deliver on what they promise to offer. A creative space with with functional foods that help you to brainstorm, and that probably some psychologists out there could actually demonstrate in a study that, yes, by putting people in this room rather than that room, by sharing food rather than having your own food, by having this kind of food rather than that food, by using this scent rather than that one, we can significantly increase the likelihood of agreement or the value of contracts negotiated or innovative solutions to problems.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see what your new building looks like, because presumably, logically, they ought to be speaking to you and getting your views on it.
Ought to be, but there's always the various interests at play, and the accountants are always hard ones to convince. But in principle, yeah, we'll see. And hopefully, some of the ideas, I think, from what I've seen of the plan, some of the ideas will be incorporated.
Fabulous stuff. Well, listen, thank you. The time, as ever, when I speak to you, has just flown past. I will put details of Sensehacking in the show notes. Clearly, you wouldn't be on the show if I wasn't massively recommending the book. It's a brilliant read, and it literally, I mean, it calls me, for all the obvious reasons. I went straight to my fridge when I was reading about food packaging to have a look and see what was in there and how I'd been manipulated by the supermarket. But also, it just caused me lots of thoughts. And so thank you for, one, providing me with some tips to get through the next few phases of lockdown. But secondly, for being such a fabulous and stimulating guest.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you.
So that's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My massive thanks to Charles for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Charles's work and get details of his book, Sensehacking, have a look in the show notes. There are links to both. If you're new to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the main platforms. I'll be back with another episode from this series very soon. But in the meantime, please stay safe, mind your senses, and I'll see you back here for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast.